The day started like any other at O'Hare International Airport in Chicago. The sprawling terminal buzzed with activity as travelers hurried to their gates, dragging suitcases behind them and clutching boarding passes. Among the sea of people stood Michael McCaffery, a tall man in his early 30s wearing an oversized hoodie that looked like it hadn't seen a washing machine in weeks. His jeans were slightly frayed at the edges, and his scruffy beard gave him a rugged appearance. He wasn't dressed for attention, but somehow he ended up drawing more than he bargained for. Michael had been waiting patiently near Gate 27, his eyes occasionally glancing at the arrivals board to check if her flight was on time. Caitlin Clark was the name flashing in his mind. Caitlin, his girlfriend, was no ordinary person. She was a rising basketball star, known not just for her incredible skills on the court, but also for her fiery personality off it. Her games drew massive crowds, and her social media following was growing by the day. But to Michael, she was simply the woman he loved, the one who made his life brighter, even when things got tough. This trip was supposed to be special. After weeks of back-to-back games and late-night practices, Caitlin was finally flying home. Michael had driven hours to meet her at the airport, eager to surprise her with flowers and a warm hug. He imagined her walking out of the gate, her signature leather jacket paired with her team jersey, sunglasses perched stylishly on her head. He could almost hear her laugh as she spotted him holding up their usual "Go Kate" sign. It was a routine they cherished, a small tradition that reminded them both of how far they'd come together. But fate had other plans. As Michael leaned against a pillar, scrolling through his phone to pass the time, two airport security officers approached him. They wore stern expressions, their walk brisk and purposeful. One of them, a burly man with a clipboard, stopped directly in front of Michael. "Sir, we need you to come with us," he said firmly, his voice cutting through the hum of the terminal. Michael blinked, confused. "What? Why?" he asked, straightening up. His heart began to race as he noticed the way the officers exchanged glances, their body language tense. "We've received complaints about your behavior," the second officer chimed in, a woman with sharp features and a no-nonsense tone. "You're making some passengers uncomfortable." Michael's jaw dropped. "Uncomfortable? I haven't done anything. I'm just standing here waiting for my girlfriend." The officers didn't seem swayed by his protests. "Sir, please don't make this difficult," the first officer said, gesturing toward the exit. "We'll sort this out outside." Michael felt a surge of frustration bubbling inside him. He wanted to argue, to demand answers, but something in their demeanor told him it wouldn't help. Reluctantly, he followed them, casting one last glance at the arrivals board before stepping out into the cold Chicago air. Outside, the wind whipped around him, biting at his exposed skin. He pulled his hoodie tighter around himself, trying to process what had just happened. As he stood there, shivering and angry, Michael couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't about him at all. It was about appearances, his unkempt look, his casual clothes, the way he carried himself. People judged him without knowing him, assuming the worst based on superficial details. He clenched his fists, wondering how he would explain this to Caitlin when she arrived. She hated injustice, and this situation reeked of it. Back inside the terminal, the bustling crowd continued moving, oblivious to the drama unfolding outside. Passengers rushed to catch their flights, while others lounged in the seating areas, scrolling through their phones or chatting with companions. No one paid much attention to the man who had been escorted out. Not yet, anyway. Little did anyone know, this seemingly minor incident was about to spiral into something much bigger. Minutes ticked by, and the atmosphere inside the airport shifted subtly. A ripple of excitement moved through the crowd as Caitlin's flight landed. Fans gathered near the arrival gate, craning their necks to catch a glimpse of the basketball star. When Caitlin finally emerged, she looked every bit the superstar she was. Her confident stride and radiant smile turned heads, and the cheers from her fans echoed through the terminal. She waved graciously, signing autographs and taking selfies as she made her way through the crowd. But amidst the adoration, Caitlin's sharp eyes scanned the area for a familiar face. Where was Michael? She expected to see him holding up their playful "Go Kate" sign, grinning ear to ear. Instead, she found herself surrounded by strangers, none of whom could tell her where he was. Concern crept into her expression as she asked around, her voice tinged with worry. A young woman nearby hesitated before speaking up. "I think I saw someone being taken away by security earlier," she said softly. "He was standing right over there." She pointed toward the spot where Michael had been waiting. Caitlin's stomach sank. She knew Michael well enough to understand that he wouldn't leave unless something serious had happened. Determination set in as she marched toward the information desk, her heels clicking against the tiled floor. The staff member behind the counter looked up, startled by the intensity in her gaze. "Where is he?" Caitlin demanded, her voice firm and unyielding. "What did you do with the man who was waiting here?" The staff member stammered, clearly unprepared for the confrontation. "Ma'am, there was a misunderstanding. Someone matching his description was removed due to security concerns." "Security concerns?" Caitlin repeated, incredulous. Her hands balled into fists as she leaned closer. "Are you telling me you kicked out my boyfriend because of how he looked?" The room fell silent as all eyes turned to Caitlin. Her fame amplified the tension, and the staff member visibly paled under her glare. Caitlin didn't wait for further explanation. She stormed off, determined to find Michael and get to the bottom of this mess. What had started as a joyful reunion was quickly turning into a battle for justice, and Caitlin Clark wasn't someone who backed down easily. Caitlin's strides were purposeful as she navigated through the crowded terminal, her mind racing with questions. She couldn't believe what she had just heard, that Michael, the man who had supported her through every high and low, had been removed from the airport simply because of how he looked. Her blood boiled at the thought of it. How could anyone mistake him for a threat? He was the kindest person she knew, someone who would go out of his way to help others without expecting anything in return. The injustice of it all gnawed at her. She approached the security checkpoint. Caitlin spotted one of the officers who had escorted Michael earlier. The officer, a middle-aged man with a clipboard tucked under his arm, seemed startled when he realized Caitlin was heading straight for him. Before he could react, Caitlin planted herself firmly in front of him, her piercing gaze locking onto his. "Where is he?" she demanded, her voice sharp enough to cut through steel. "What did you do with Michael McCaffery?" The officer hesitated, clearly caught off guard by her intensity. "Ma'am, we had to ask him to leave due to concerns raised by other passengers," he stammered, avoiding eye contact. "Concerns?" Caitlin shot back, her tone dripping with disbelief. "What kind of concerns? Did he threaten someone? Did he break any rules? Or did you just decide that his hoodie and beard made him look suspicious?" Her words hung heavy in the air, silencing everyone within earshot. Passengers slowed down to watch the exchange, their curiosity piqued. A few people even began whispering among themselves, recognizing Caitlin and realizing they were witnessing something significant unfold. The officer shifted uncomfortably, trying to maintain composure. "It's protocol, ma'am. We have to ensure the safety of all travelers." "Safety?" Caitlin interrupted, raising her voice slightly. "You think kicking out an innocent man makes this place safer? Tell me, does your protocol include profiling people based on their appearance? Because if it does, then your system is broken." Her words struck a nerve, not just with the officer but also with the growing crowd around them. Some nodded, in agreement, while others pulled out their phones to record the moment. Caitlin, always aware of her platform, knew this was more than just a personal issue. It was a chance to shine a light on something bigger, the biases and prejudices that still existed in everyday life. Without waiting for a response, Caitlin pushed past the officer and headed toward the manager's office. She wasn't about to let this slide, not for Michael, not for anyone else who might face similar treatment. As she walked, her phone buzzed in her pocket. Glancing at the screen, she saw notifications pouring in from fans who had already heard rumors of the incident. Social media was ablaze with speculation, hashtags like "Justice for Michael" trending rapidly. Caitlin clenched her jaw, vowing to use the attention to make a difference. When she reached the manager's office, Caitlin didn't bother knocking. She swung the door open wide, her presence commanding immediate attention. Inside, Michael sat, slouched in a chair, his expression a mix of frustration and resignation. When he saw Caitlin, relief washed over his face, but it quickly turned to concern as he noticed the storm brewing in her eyes. "Are you okay?" she asked softly, kneeling beside him. Her voice was gentle now, filled with genuine worry. "I'm fine," Michael replied, forcing a small smile. "But I don't understand why this happened. I was just waiting for you." Caitlin squeezed his hand reassuringly before turning her focus to the manager seated behind the desk. The man, a balding, middle-aged individual in a crisp suit, looked visibly nervous as Caitlin fixed him with a steely glare. "So explain this to me," she began, crossing her arms. "Why exactly did you kick out my boyfriend? Was it because he doesn't fit some cookie-cutter image of what a traveler should look like?" The manager cleared his throat, fumbling for words. "Ms. Clark, please allow me to clarify. Our staff acted based on reports from passengers who felt uneasy." "Uneasy?" Caitlin cut in, her voice rising. "Let me tell you something. Michael has spent months traveling across the country to support me, to cheer me on during games, to carry my bags, to keep me grounded when things got tough. And now you're telling me he doesn't deserve to wait for me at the airport? Do you even know who I am?" The manager swallowed hard, nodding nervously. "Yes, Ms. Clark, of course. You're Caitlin Clark, the basketball star." "That's right," Caitlin interrupted again, leaning forward. "And I'm using my platform to call out this nonsense. This isn't just about Michael. It's about every person who has ever been judged unfairly because of how they dress, how they talk, or how they look. Your so-called protocol needs to change." By now the room was tense, charged with emotion. Caitlin wasn't yelling, but her words carried weight, each sentence landing like a hammer blow. The manager, sensing the gravity of the situation, tried to backtrack. "We deeply regret the misunderstanding, Ms. Clark," he said hurriedly. "Please accept our sincerest apologies. We'll take steps to ensure this doesn't happen again." Caitlin raised an eyebrow, unimpressed. "Apologies aren't enough. Actions speak louder than words. What are you going to do to fix this?" The manager hesitated, unsure how to respond. Sensing his discomfort, Caitlin pulled out her phone and began recording. "Let's make this clear," she said, addressing the camera. "This man right here, my boyfriend, is one of the hardest working, most loyal people I know. Yet today he was treated like a criminal, simply because of how he looks. That's unacceptable. Until airports and institutions like yours stop judging people based on stereotypes, nothing will truly change." Her video went live within seconds, spreading like wildfire across social media platforms. Fans flooded the comments section, expressing outrage and support. Journalists scrambled to reach out for statements, and soon, the story dominated headlines nationwide. The airport found itself at the center of a public relations firestorm, with calls for accountability echoing from all corners. Back in the office, the manager frantically offered compensation, VIP lounge access, free travel vouchers, anything, to appease Caitlin. But she shook her head firmly. "This isn't about perks or privileges, it's about fairness. If you're serious about making amends, work with organizations that fight against discrimination and bias. Train your staff to see people for who they really are, not what they assume them to be." Her demand left no room for negotiation. The manager, realizing the magnitude of the situation, reluctantly agreed. As Caitlin and Michael left the office together, the weight of what had transpired settled over them. For Michael, it was surreal to think that his quiet, unassuming life had become the subject of national discussion. But for Caitlin, it was validation that standing up for what was right, even in the face of adversity, was always worth it. Outside, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the terminal. Caitlin wrapped an arm around Michael's shoulders, pulling him close. "I'm sorry this happened to you," she murmured, "but we're going to make sure it doesn't happen to anyone else." Michael smiled faintly, gratitude shining in his eyes. "Thank you," he said simply, knowing words could never fully capture how much her support meant to him. As they walked away, hand in hand, Caitlin couldn't help but reflect on the day's events. What started as a routine trip to the airport had turned into a pivotal moment, one that highlighted the power of love, resilience, and the courage to challenge injustice. And though neither of them sought fame or controversy, they embraced the opportunity to spark meaningful change. After all, sometimes the smallest actions can lead to the biggest impact. The days following the incident at O'Hare International Airport were anything but ordinary for Caitlin Clark and Michael McCaffery. What had started as a personal grievance quickly snowballed into a national conversation, with Caitlin's video sparking outrage and debate across social media platforms. The hashtag #JusticeForMichael trended relentlessly, accompanied by countless posts calling out systemic biases in public spaces. People shared their own stories of being profiled or mistreated because of their appearance, creating a groundswell of support for Caitlin and Michael. For Caitlin, the attention was overwhelming, but not entirely unfamiliar. As a rising basketball star, she was used to being in the spotlight. But this time it wasn't about her achievements on the court, it was about standing up for what was right. She spent hours responding to messages from fans, thanking them for their support and encouraging them to keep speaking out against injustice. Her phone buzzed non-stop with notifications, interview requests, and calls from journalists eager to hear her side of the story. Despite the chaos, Caitlin remained focused. This wasn't just about her and Michael anymore. It was about shining a light on a much larger issue. Meanwhile, Michael found himself thrust into a role he never imagined. He wasn't someone who craved attention, nor did he consider himself particularly remarkable. Yet here he was, the face of a movement that resonated with thousands of people. Strangers approached him online and in person, sharing how his story inspired them to speak up about similar experiences. At first, Michael felt uneasy about the sudden fame, but Caitlin reassured him. "You didn't ask for this," she told him one evening as they sat together in her apartment, scrolling through social media. "But maybe this is your chance to make a difference." Caitlin wasted no time leveraging the momentum. Within 48 hours of the incident, she partnered with several advocacy organizations dedicated to combating racial profiling and socioeconomic bias. Together, they drafted a proposal urging airports and other institutions to implement mandatory training programs for staff, focusing on recognizing and addressing implicit biases. Caitlin also called for greater transparency in decision-making processes, suggesting that passengers be informed of their rights during security interventions. Her efforts didn't stop there. Caitlin appeared on major news networks, using her IA platform to amplify the message. During one televised interview, she recounted the events at O'Hare with raw emotion, her voice trembling as she described the hurt and frustration Michael had endured. "It's not just about me or my boyfriend," she emphasized, looking directly into the camera. "It's about every person who has ever been judged unfairly because of stereotypes. We need to do better, not just as individuals, but as a society." Her words struck a chord with viewers. Calls poured into the airport's management office demanding accountability and change. Social media users tagged the airport's official accounts in their posts, flooding them with comments like, "Shame on you for treating someone so unfairly," and "Fix your policies before someone else gets hurt." The pressure mounted, forcing the airport to take swift action. In response to the backlash, O'Hare's management issued a formal apology, not only to Caitlin and Michael but to the public at large. They promised to review their security protocols and work closely with advocacy groups to prevent similar incidents in the future. To demonstrate their commitment, they invited Caitlin to collaborate on developing new training modules for staff. Though skeptical at first, Caitlin agreed, seeing it as an opportunity to effect real change. As the weeks went by, the ripple effects of the incident became undeniable. Airports across the country began revisiting their own policies, spurred by the growing demand for accountability. Some even reached out to Caitlin asking for advice on how to address bias within their teams. It was a turning point, a moment when collective voices pushed institutions to confront uncomfortable truths and strive for improvement. For Michael, life slowly returned to some semblance of normalcy, though it was far from the quiet existence he once led. He continued traveling to Caitlin's games, cheering her on from the stands with his trademark enthusiasm. Fans often recognized him now, approaching him with words of encouragement or simply to shake his hand. While the attention still made him uncomfortable, he learned to embrace it, knowing it served a greater purpose. One afternoon, as Caitlin prepared for an upcoming game, Michael sat quietly on the couch, flipping through a magazine. His expression was thoughtful, almost distant. Sensing his mood, Caitlin paused mid-stretch and walked over to him. "What's on your mind?" she asked gently, sitting beside him. Michael hesitated before speaking. "I've been thinking, I never wanted any of this. Not the interviews, not the hashtags, none of it. But now that it's happened, I feel like we have a responsibility to keep going, to make sure something good comes out of it." Caitlin smiled softly, placing a hand on his knee. "That's exactly why I love you," she said. "You always think about others even when things get tough. And don't worry, we're not stopping anytime soon." True to her word, Caitlin doubled down on her efforts. She organized community forums where people could share their experiences of discrimination and offer suggestions for reform. She spoke at schools and universities, inspiring young athletes to use their platforms for positive change. Her message was simple yet powerful. Everyone deserves to be treated with dignity and respect, regardless of how they look or where they come from. The airport, too, worked diligently to rebuild trust. They launched a campaign highlighting the changes they were making, including testimonials from staff members who had undergone bias training. A plaque commemorating the incident was installed near Gate 27, serving as a reminder of the importance of fairness and inclusivity. For Caitlin and Michael, it was a bittersweet victory, a painful chapter transformed into a catalyst for progress. Months later, Caitlin returned to O'Hare after another successful game. This time, the atmosphere was different. Staff members greeted her warmly, shaking hands with Michael and expressing gratitude for helping bring attention to critical issues. Passengers stopped to thank them as well, sharing how the changes had impacted their own experiences at the airport. As they walked hand in hand toward the exit, Caitlin glanced at Michael, her heart swelling with pride. "See? Sometimes the hardest moments lead to the biggest breakthroughs," she said, squeezing his hand. Michael chuckled softly, nodding in agreement. "Yeah, I guess you're right. Who knew waiting at an airport could turn into, well, all this?" They both laughed, the sound echoing through the terminal. Despite everything they had been through, they remained grounded, grateful for each other and the opportunities they had to make a difference. Though neither sought fame or controversy, they embraced the responsibility that came with it, proving that even the most ordinary moments could spark extraordinary change. And as they disappeared into the crowd, one thing was clear: their story was far from over. It was a testament to the power of love, resilience, and the courage to challenge the status quo, reminders that sometimes the smallest actions can leave the deepest impact. The aftermath of the O'Hare incident continued to unfold in ways no one could have predicted. Caitlin Clark and Michael McCaffery found themselves at the center of a movement that transcended their personal lives. What began as an unjust ejection from an airport terminal had grown into a national dialogue about prejudice, bias, and fairness in public spaces. For Caitlin, this was more than just fighting for her boyfriend. It was about creating lasting change. Caitlin threw herself into advocacy work, determined to turn the negative experience into something positive. She partnered with organizations like the Equal Justice Initiative and local community groups focused on combating discrimination. Together, they developed workshops aimed at educating people about implicit biases, those unconscious attitudes or stereotypes that influence behavior without us even realizing it. These workshops weren't limited to airports. They extended to schools, businesses, and law enforcement agencies, reaching far beyond the initial scope of the incident. One particular initiative stood out: a nationwide campaign called See Beyond. The program encouraged people to look past appearances and focus on actions instead. Posters featuring Caitlin and Michael were plastered across bus stops, billboards, and social media platforms. One poster showed a close-up photo of Michael's face, his scruffy beard and hoodie prominent with bold text reading, "Don't judge me by my looks." Below it, in smaller letters, was a quote from Caitlin. "Everyone deserves to be treated with dignity, no matter how they dress or where they come from." The campaign resonated deeply with the public. Stories poured in from people who had faced similar situations, being profiled at stores, denied service at restaurants, or questioned by authorities simply because of how they looked. A young college student named Jamal wrote to Caitlin, sharing how he'd been stopped by security guards while shopping for groceries because his hoodie made him look suspicious. Another woman, Maria, recounted being refused entry to a hotel despite having a valid reservation, all because her casual attire didn't match the staff's expectations of a guest. Each story fueled Caitlin's resolve. She responded personally to many of these messages, offering words of encouragement and reminding them that their voices mattered. "You're not alone," she often wrote. "Together, we can make sure things change." Her empathy and authenticity struck a chord, earning her admiration from fans and critics alike. Meanwhile, Michael navigated his newfound role with quiet humility. He wasn't comfortable being in the spotlight, but he understood the importance of what was happening. When asked to speak at events or participate in interviews, he agreed, though reluctantly. His calm demeanor and genuine nature won over audiences, making him a relatable figure in the fight against bias. During one panel discussion hosted by a civil rights organization, Michael shared his thoughts candidly. "I never thought something like this would happen to me," he admitted, looking out at the crowd. "But now that it has, I realize how lucky I am." Not everyone gets a chance to tell their story or have someone stand up for them the way Caitlin did for me. So if sharing my experience helps even one person feel less alone, then it's worth it. His words earned applause, but more importantly, they inspired action. Attendees left the event motivated to challenge discriminatory practices in their own communities. Some started petitions demanding policy changes in local institutions, while others organized awareness campaigns to educate friends and family about the dangers of stereotyping. Back at O'Hare International Airport, management worked tirelessly to repair its tarnished reputation. They collaborated closely with Caitlin and the advocacy groups she represented, implementing sweeping reforms to address the root causes of bias among staff. Training sessions became mandatory for all employees, focusing not only on recognizing prejudice but also on fostering empathy and understanding. Role-playing exercises allowed staff members to step into passengers' shoes, helping them see situations from different perspectives. To ensure accountability, the airport introduced a feedback system where travelers could report instances of unfair treatment anonymously. This data was reviewed regularly by an independent oversight committee, tasked with monitoring progress and identifying areas for improvement. Additionally, a new position was created, a diversity officer responsible for overseeing inclusivity initiatives and addressing concerns raised by passengers or employees. These changes didn't go unnoticed. Passengers began noticing subtle shifts in how they were treated. Staff members greeted them with warmer smiles and took time to listen when issues arose. Even small gestures, like offering assistance with luggage or providing clear directions, went a long way in restoring trust. Social media buzzed with positive reviews, praising the airport for its efforts to become more welcoming and inclusive. For Caitlin, seeing tangible results was incredibly rewarding. But she knew there was still much work to be done. Bias wasn't confined to airports, it permeated every aspect of society. Determined to keep the momentum going, she expanded her advocacy efforts to other industries. She met with executives from retail chains, hospitality companies, and transportation networks, urging them to adopt similar reforms. Many listened, inspired by her passion and persistence. Her influence reached unexpected places too. Schools incorporated discussions about bias and fairness into their curriculums, using Caitlin's story as a case study. Sports teams held workshops for players and coaches, emphasizing the importance of treating everyone equally both on and off the court. Even celebrities joined the cause, amplifying Caitlin's message through their own platforms. Despite the progress, challenges remained. There were skeptics who dismissed Caitlin's efforts as performative activism. accusing her of seeking attention rather than genuine change. Others argued that systemic issues couldn't be solved overnight and criticized her for setting unrealistic expectations. Caitlin acknowledged these criticisms but refused to let them deter her. "Change takes time," she said during an interview. "But that doesn't mean we should stop trying. Every step forward counts." Michael, ever supportive, stood by her side throughout it all. He attended events, gave interviews, and helped brainstorm ideas for new initiatives. Their partnership grew stronger as they navigated the ups and downs together, united by a shared vision of a fairer world. Friends joke that Caitlin's fiery determination balanced perfectly with Michael's steady calmness, creating a dynamic duo capable of tackling anything. As months turned into a year, the impact of their work became undeniable. Laws were proposed to protect individuals from discriminatory practices in public spaces. Companies adopted stricter anti-bias policies, holding employees accountable for unfair treatment. Conversations about privilege and prejudice became commonplace, encouraging people to reflect on their own behaviors and assumptions. Through it all, Caitlin and Michael remained grounded. They celebrated victories, mourned setbacks, and kept pushing forward, knowing that true change required patience and perseverance. Though neither sought fame or controversy, they embraced the responsibility that came with it, proving that ordinary moments could spark extraordinary outcomes. And so, as they continued their journey, advocating, educating, and inspiring, they carried with them the belief that love, courage, and resilience could overcome even the toughest challenges. Because sometimes, the smallest actions leave the deepest impact, transforming lives and reshaping the world in ways no one could have imagined. As the months rolled by, Caitlin Clark and Michael McCaffery's story became more than just a tale of injustice. It evolved into a symbol of hope and resilience. The movement they had inadvertently sparked grew roots in communities across the country, inspiring people from all walks of life to challenge biases and demand fairness. For Caitlin, this journey was both exhilarating and exhausting. Balancing her basketball career with advocacy work tested her limits, but she refused to slow down. Every game, every interview, and every appearance became an opportunity to spread her message. Caitlin's influence extended far beyond social media campaigns or policy changes at airports. She began receiving invitations to speak at high-profile events, conferences, summits, and even legislative hearings where lawmakers debated anti-discrimination laws. Her presence commanded attention, not because of her fame as a basketball star, but because of her unwavering commitment to justice. At one such event, a national conference on equality and inclusion, Caitlin delivered a speech that left the audience spellbound. Standing on stage under bright lights, Caitlin gripped the microphone tightly, her voice steady yet filled with emotion. "When Michael was kicked out of that airport, I felt anger, not just for him but for everyone who has ever been treated unfairly because of how they look," she began. "But anger alone doesn't create change. Action does. And that's why we're here today, to take action." She paused, scanning the room. The attendees, activists, policymakers, business leaders, and everyday citizens, leaned forward, hanging on to her every word. Bias isn't something you can see or touch, but it's real. It lives in our assumptions, our stereotypes, and our fears. And if we don't confront it head-on, it will continue to divide us. Her speech touched on personal anecdotes like the time a coach told her she wasn't tall enough to play basketball professionally, or when fans doubted her abilities simply because she was a woman. But she also shared stories from others, people who had reached out to her after hearing about the airport incident. Their voices, she said, reminded her why this fight mattered so much. Every person deserves to be seen for who they are, not judged by preconceived notions. That's what we're working toward. A world where everyone gets a fair chance. The applause that followed was thunderous, echoing through the auditorium. People rushed to congratulate her afterward, some even tearing up as they thanked her for giving them hope. One elderly woman approached Caitlin with tears streaming down her face. "You remind me of my granddaughter," she said softly. "She's been fighting her own battles against bias. Hearing you speak gives me faith that things can get better." Moments like these fueled Caitlin's determination. They reminded Heard that her efforts weren't just about headlines or hashtags, they were about real people whose lives could be transformed by change. Michael, too, found himself deeply moved by the impact of their work. Though he still preferred staying, behind the scenes he couldn't deny the sense of purpose he felt. Together, they were making a difference. Back home, Caitlin and Michael continued brainstorming ways to amplify their message. One idea that particularly excited them was creating a documentary series titled Beyond Appearances. The series would explore stories of individuals who had faced discrimination and highlight the systemic issues contributing to bias. Each episode would feature interviews, expert commentary, and actionable steps viewers could take to combat prejudice in their own lives. To bring the project to life, Caitlin partnered with a renowned filmmaker known for tackling social justice issues. Filming began shortly after, with the first episode focusing on Michael's experience at O'Hare. Cameras captured candid moments between Caitlin and Michael as they revisited the airport together. Standing near Gate 27, Michael reflected on the day everything changed. "I never thought something like this could happen to me," he admitted, his voice tinged with emotion. "But now, looking back, I realize how important it is to keep talking about it. If sharing my story helps someone else feel less alone, then it's worth it." The raw honesty of their conversation resonated with viewers when the episode aired. Critics praised the series for its authenticity and emotional depth, calling it a powerful tool for education and empathy. Schools and community centers began screening episodes, sparking discussions about bias and fairness. Viewers flooded social media with comments, sharing how the series opened their eyes to injustices they hadn't noticed before. While the documentary gained traction, Caitlin and Michael also focused on grassroots efforts. They traveled to cities across the country, hosting town halls and workshops aimed at empowering local communities. In Chicago, they collaborated with youth organizations to teach teenagers about leadership and advocacy. In Los Angeles, they worked with immigrant families to address language barriers and cultural misunderstandings. Everywhere they went, they truly listened to people's stories, ensuring their initiatives reflected real needs rather than assumptions. Their travels brought challenges, of course. Long hours on the road took a toll, and there were days when exhaustion threatened to overwhelm them. But Caitlin and Michael supported each other through it all, leaning on their shared strength. During quiet moments in hotel rooms or late-night drives, they reminded themselves of the bigger picture. "We're doing this for the next generation," Caitlin often said. "If we can make things even a little bit better for them, it'll all be worth it." By the end of the year, the ripple effects of their work were undeniable. Airports nationwide adopted stricter anti-bias policies, inspired by the reforms at O'Hare. Retail chains implemented training programs to prevent racial profiling, while schools introduced curriculums focused on diversity and inclusion. Even sports leagues followed suit, encouraging teams to engage in community outreach and advocate for social justice. For Caitlin, one of the most rewarding aspects was seeing young athletes step up to join the cause. Many looked up to her not just as a basketball player, but as a role model who used her platform for good. Teenagers started organizing fundraisers for advocacy groups, while college players launched campaigns to promote inclusivity within their teams. Caitlin made it a point to mentor these emerging leaders, offering guidance and encouragement whenever she could. Despite the progress, Caitlin and Michael remained vigilant. They knew that change was a marathon, not a sprint. There would always be setbacks, moments when cynicism crept in or when critics dismissed their efforts as futile. But they refused to let negativity dampen their spirits. Instead, they celebrated small victories, no matter how insignificant they might seem. Whether it was a heartfelt thank you note from a stranger or a policy update from an institution, every win reinforced their belief in the power of persistence. One evening, as they sat together on the couch watching a replay of Caitlin's latest game, Michael turned to her with a thoughtful expression. "Do you ever think about what might have happened if that day at the airport had gone differently?" he asked. "If they hadn't kicked me out?" Caitlin smiled, resting her head on his shoulder. "Honestly, I think about it all the time, but maybe this was supposed to happen. Maybe it was meant to push us to do something bigger than ourselves. Michael nodded slowly, his gaze softening. Yeah, I guess you're right. Sometimes the hardest moments lead to the greatest opportunities. They sat in comfortable silence, reflecting on how far they'd come. From a frustrating encounter at an airport terminal to a nationwide movement for justice, their journey had been anything but ordinary. Yet through it all they had remained steadfast, two ordinary people determined to make an extraordinary impact. And as they prepared for the next chapter of their lives, one thing was certain. Their story was far from over. With love, courage, and resilience as their guiding principles, Caitlin and Michael continued to inspire those around them, proving that even the smallest actions could spark monumental change. Because sometimes, it's the quietest voices that resonate the loudest and the simplest acts of kindness that leave the deepest impressions. The final chapter of Caitlin Clark and Michael McCaffery's journey unfolded in ways neither of them could have anticipated. What had begun as a single incident at O'Hare International Airport, a moment of injustice that left them frustrated and hurt, had grown into a movement that touched countless lives. Their story, once confined to the walls of an airport terminal, now spanned cities, industries, and even generations. It was a testament to the power of resilience, love, and the courage to stand up for what is right. By the second year since the incident, Caitlin and Michael were no longer just individuals fighting for justice. They were symbols of hope. People from all walks of life looked to them as proof that ordinary people could ignite extraordinary change. The hashtag Donor Justice for Michael had evolved into something greater. Beyond appearances, a rallying cry for equality and fairness. Social media posts continued to pour in, each one carrying a piece of the legacy they had built together. Caitlin's advocacy work reached new heights as she expanded her efforts internationally. She traveled to countries where discrimination ran rampant, meeting with activists and leaders who shared her vision of a more inclusive world. In South Africa, she visited townships and spoke with young girls about breaking barriers in sports and education. In India, she collaborated with organizations working to empower women and marginalized communities. Everywhere she went, she carried the same message. We are stronger when we see beyond appearances and embrace our shared humanity. Michael, though still reserved compared to Caitlin's outgoing nature, found his voice in these global endeavors. He began documenting their travels through photography, capturing moments of connection and resilience. His photos told stories words couldn't fully express: the laughter of children playing basketball in rural villages, the determination in the eyes of women challenging societal norms, the quiet strength of elders sharing wisdom passed down through generations. These images became part of exhibitions showcased in galleries around the world, further amplifying their mission. Back home, the impact of their work was evident in everyday interactions. Airports, once criticized for biased practices, transformed into spaces of inclusivity. Staff members greeted passengers warmly, regardless of how they dressed or looked. Signs reading, "Welcome all," adorned terminals, serving as reminders of the progress made. Retail stores implemented policies ensuring fair treatment for customers, while schools introduced programs teaching students the importance of empathy and understanding. One afternoon, Caitlin received an invitation that filled her with pride. The United Nations had asked her to speak at a summit focused on combating systemic bias and promoting human rights. Standing on stage before delegates from over 100 nations, Caitlin delivered a speech that would later be hailed as one of the most inspiring moments in the summit's history. Discrimination thrives in silence, she began, her voice steady, yet passionate. It hides behind assumptions, stereotypes, and fear. But when we choose to speak out, to challenge those biases, we take the first step toward creating a better world. She recounted her own experiences, from the day Michael was unfairly removed from the airport to the countless stories she had heard from others facing similar struggles. "This isn't just my story," she emphasized. "It's our story. Each of us has a role to play in dismantling systems of oppression and building bridges of understanding." Her words resonated deeply, earning a standing ovation from the audience. Delegates approached her afterward, eager to learn more about her initiatives and collaborate on future projects. One ambassador from Kenya summed it up perfectly. "You've shown us that change starts with compassion. Thank you for reminding us of our collective responsibility." As the years passed, Caitlin and Michael settled into a rhythm that balanced advocacy with their personal lives. Caitlin continued dominating the basketball court, her fiery energy translating seamlessly into her performances. Fans cheered not only for her skills, but also for the values she represented. Michael, meanwhile, pursued his passion for photography, publishing a book titled Through the Lens of Justice. The collection featured portraits of individuals who had overcome adversity, accompanied by essays reflecting on their journeys. Their relationship remained the cornerstone of everything they did. Through late-night conversations, shared laughter, and occasional disagreements, they supported each other unconditionally. Friends often joked that Caitlin's boldness complemented Michael's calmness perfectly, creating a dynamic partnership capable of tackling any challenge. In 2026, 5 years after the incident at O'Hare, the airport unveiled a permanent exhibit dedicated to Caitlin and Michael's story. Titled Beyond Appearances, A Journey Toward Justice. The installation included interactive displays, archival footage from the documentary series, and testimonials from people whose lives had been impacted by their advocacy. Visitors could walk through a timeline detailing the events that led to systemic changes, ending with a wall covered in handwritten notes from guests expressing gratitude and solidarity. On the day of the unveiling ceremony, Caitlin and Michael stood side by side, holding hands as they addressed the crowd. "This isn't just about us," Caitlin said, her voice choked with emotion. "It's about every person who has ever been judged unfairly. It's about every voice that refused to stay silent. And it's about the belief that, together, we can create a world where everyone feels valued." Michael added, "We didn't set out to start a movement. We just wanted to fix something that felt wrong. But along the way, we learned that even the smallest actions can lead to big changes. So keep speaking up, keep pushing forward, and never underestimate the power of doing what's right." The applause that followed was deafening, echoing through the terminal like a promise of brighter days ahead. As Caitlin and Michael walked away from the podium, hand in hand, they reflected on how far they'd come. From a frustrating encounter at Gate 27 to a nationwide and eventually global movement for justice, their journey had been anything but ordinary. Yet, amidst the accolades and achievements, they remained grounded. They knew the fight against bias and discrimination was far from over. There would always be challenges to face, battles to wage, and hearts to win over. But they faced the future with optimism, knowing they weren't alone. Millions of people stood alongside them, united by a shared vision of a fairer, kinder world. And so, as they disappeared into the bustling crowd, one thing was clear. Caitlin Clark and Michael McCaffery's story wasn't just about two people. It was about the power of love, courage, and resilience to spark monumental change. Because sometimes the simplest acts of kindness leave the deepest impressions, and the quietest voices resonate the loudest. Their journey reminded everyone that no matter how daunting the odds, ordinary moments could lead to extraordinary outcomes.